his position with the Americans. Hence, he has lost the upper moral argument.
We need to look well beyond the conflict and what are the implications for the Iranian, European, US track, and what are the implications on the issues of nuclearization and the issue of the Palestinians. I do think that the Israeli public would put a lot of pressure on the Israeli government to prevent any further unilateral withdrawal, because we've seen from both examples, both in Lebanon and in Gaza, that whenever Israel turned ground unilaterally without a viable agreement with the Arab neighbors, those areas became targeting zones against Israeli population. I think that is going to be a very instructive lesson to the Israeli government. Also, there are many questions that are now popping up inside Israel about the effectiveness of military power, about the civil-military relations within the country, about the way in which decisions were made and taken. And I do think that Israel is going to undergo a very prolonged period of internal questioning. But this is what should be happening in a democracy.
What's your view on this, Sharon? You're, after all, a defense and security analyst. You spent a long time looking at the IDF. You talk about asymmetric warfare. We've had this case of Junier, the port bridges there being bombed as well. Do you get a sense that the IDF has been wrong-footed by the military challenge it has discovered in South Lebanon?
I don't think it was wrong-footed. I think the intelligence picture was pretty much accurate. What they were prepared for was the scope of objectives that were put by the political echelon. Because the decision to have a wide-scale attack on Lebanon was taken within hours, which is something that should have been discussed at least for a few days. Secondly, there was a miscalculation by the fact that Israel assumed that overwhelming air power, they would be able to neutralize Hezbollah rocket launching capability. That proved to be completely wrong. And also, we do need to remember, if we talk about 1982 compared to 2006, Israel reached towards Beirut within a few days, and with a huge and massive casualty for the Lebanese people. More than 6,000 Lebanese were killed in 1982 compared to around 600, 700 today. Israel put a massive restraint on itself during this conflict, despite the fact that the Hezbollah is using civilian population as shield.
But this is the point about asymmetrical war, and this is also the problem for the diplomats at the UN. What are the objectives of the war? I mean, when we think of ceasefires for other kinds of wars, it's usually two armies going head-to-head. What are the objectives of Hezbollah? It is not the same as when the Egyptian army and the Jordanian army were amassing on the borders in 1967. It's an entirely different intent. The intent clearly is, one, to strike terror and fear into the hearts of Israelis, get those pictures on Arab television stations, and they've succeeded. To kill Jews, because that's sort of what they like to do. But what is the grand strategic vision? It's not like it is not possible to imagine Hezbollah sending an army over the border into Israel to end the Jewish state. It's not possible. Israel's intentions are entirely different. They are essentially offensive, defensive. Don't come over here and do this again, and we will destroy this country and hopefully put pressure on you from the other Lebanese people. But everything has changed since 1982. Also, and you find that Lebanese people are perhaps more willing to tolerate Hezbollah now.
Also, it has changed because in 1982, Hezbollah was not there. It was not. It was created after 1982.
That's true, but
can I just finish my point? Yeah, exactly. Lebanon. Who put the Palestinians there? It was the Israelis who put the Palestinians there. No. I don't want to go back to that, but let us put it in perspective. Now, it's unfortunate that so many Lebanese are being killed less than before. You are absolutely right, because now the Lebanese think, and all the Arabs and all the Muslims, that it is Hezbollah that is actually defending the country, and this is why less Lebanese are being killed.
Yeah, we see with $2 billion,
in 1982 there was
$2 billion of damage to the Lebanese infrastructure.
You created Hezbollah, basically.
Well, we created, and I don't know why they still sustain, and I tell you why, because I think this round of war was the first indirect war between Israel and Iran. I think that many intelligence and foreign armies will try to understand the tactics of the Israelis vis-a-vis the Hezbollah fighters, because they were trained and were equipped by Iranian officers. And we also need to remember that we need because this is a war not on the ground, but also on images and on perception, whether this would lead to another round of war that may plunge the entire region to instability,
right,
this is something that
Sharon,
we have to see.
You've talked about the hard searching that's going to go on in Israel, in the security institutions and also the political institutions.
Yeah.
What about for politicians, finally, Ned? When you look at the pressure now on someone like Tony Blair, where even the head of the Transport and General Workers Union, Tony Woodley, is writing saying, stop being and perceived to be the European voice of the Bush administration, the very high price that someone like Tony Blair is now paying here politically with the Labour Party.
Yeah, it's huge, and I think...
Is it redeemable?
I think it's... I think for people like Woodley, no. I think basically the problem, as Blair sometimes likes to say, it's worse than you think to his critics. I actually believe this stuff, and I think the problem isn't that Blair is Bush's poodle. I think Blair genuinely thought, and ironically, this is... the discussion we've had this morning kind of implies he's right, that merely to have gotten some very quick, meaningless ceasefire resolution and to say, look, watch me, I'm doing this, would have been almost irresponsible. And in fact, the hard digging, the kinds of things that Baria rightly says Lebanon needs, and in fact, Sharon, you say you agree, is some sort of stable framework. And I think to Blair's credit, that's what he's been working on. But politically, will he recoup this? Very difficult.
Well, let's finally look at another major challenge in international affairs. The week before his 80th birthday and 47 years into his control of Cuba, we have to assume that Fidel Castro is, as the official statements claim, recovering well from major stomach surgery. But the surgery and handing over of power to brother Raul has suddenly shifted Washington's political interest to the island just 90 miles, that's about 130 kilometers, off Florida. On Friday, U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice even made a ministerial television address to tell all Cubans who desire peaceful democratic change, as she put it, that Washington will be there to help them, as she put it, secure their rights. Well, Michael, is this premature, over the top, or a smart, opportunistic move?
Well, this has been in the planning for some time. I mean, in 2003, 2004, Colin Powell and Senator Mel Martinez, who's a Cuban-American senator, Republican senator from Florida, actually put together a 400-page report on a transition for when Castro was, I think they realized they'd never be able to assassinate him. He was going to last till his biological clock stopped. They appointed a transition person. And certainly the Bush administration feels that it has the right to have a strong voice in whatever happens after Fidel passes power along.
Do they really believe that the maximum chief, as he calls himself, if he goes, maximum communism in Cuba will suddenly disappear?
There'll be a transition.
Do they believe it?
They honestly think they can use that moment to push and then suddenly institute the democracy. You know what their mantra is. It should also be said that they have a track record of being loyal to their loyal supporters. Some would call that pandering. The Cuban-American community in Miami has been exceptionally loyal to the Bush administration, and they will put a great deal of pressure, I believe, on the island of Cuba.
But quickly, do you reckon it's more wishful thinking than pragmatic assessment?
I think it entails a great deal of wishful thinking, because it's not just the Cubans who haven't been consulted on this. You know, there's no embargo between Britain and Cuba. There's no embargo between the European Union and Cuba or Canada and Cuba. There's a lot of business interests there that need to be dealt with as well.
Right, Baria, you actually interviewed the maximum chief back in 1980 when he was halfway through his 47 years in power.
Yes.
Quickly, your impression.
I'm still suffering his long answers, actually.
But very quickly, your assessment of whether his problems mean potentially the end of communism in Cuba.
Yes, I really don't think so, and I think the very reasons that my colleague mentioned is that you have to consult people. Again, I go back to the Middle East. We have seen how the Americans are actually trying to spread democracy in the Middle East. It's faltering in Iraq. It will falter everywhere. So my instinct is not to have confidence in anything that the American administration, this American administration is trying to do, specifically when you come to democracy.
All right,
I just want to pick up from the point where Barry left. I do think that it's pretty much pie in the sky and wishful thinking, all those interesting phrases, but we need to see it, past examples. After the passing of the late Arafat, people felt that Israel and Palestinian authorities will start a honeymoon of some sort, and we've seen what happened since then. I do think that the Americans are a bit worried from the rapid Hispanization of the U.S., and they will try to prevent as much as possible a flood of immigrants into the U.S., and therefore they're already speaking about rebuilding Cuba and all this kind of rhetoric to prevent a failed state.
Easy to say, though. Finally, Ned, I mean, when you look at the relationships Cuba have built up with Bolivia, with Venezuela, with Chile, the leftward swing in South America, do you think this is hard aspiration from Washington which is achievable?
I don't. I think it is wishful thinking. I think, ironically, the most effective way of weaning Cuba off communism is probably to increase human contacts, to get rid of embargoes. I mean, it's not far enough from the United States that natural processes won't sooner or later come up with some happy medium between the two. But that's for reasons Michael said, that's not easy if you're a Republican president.
All right, well, Ned, Baria, Sharon, and Michael, thank you very much indeed. As far as we know, he's recovering well from surgery. He may be around for many years to come, President Castro. That's it. Thanks all of you for joining us at our new time here on Dateline London. From me, Nick Gowing, and all the guests and team, I'm back with Dateline London at the same time next week. Till then, bye for now.
Well, this is it. They're playing on words, aren't they? Some people in Israel are saying that it means that if Hezbollah moves, then we are able to bombard it. It's playing on words, if you ask me. I think a cessation should be like a ceasefire. It means halting of shooting on both sides. I think, your previous speaker, the ambassador to the UN, put it very well. You cannot look for political solutions while the killing is going on, especially in the case of Lebanon, because Israel has made sure that if people are not killed by bombardment, they're being killed because they have no medicines or no food or no fuel. The country in Lebanon as it is, as Israel has made the conditions on the ground as they are now, is not sustainable for the Lebanese government to sustain its people, to make them just continue living, let alone winter which is approaching. This condition of people living in hospitals or in gardens or on the streets or in the parks is not sustainable for a long time.
Very briefly,
yes.
If Lebanese authorities were putting pride before common sense, putting pride before practicalities here, would that be a sensible thing to do?
It is not pride. This is what you're missing the point. Because if you leave these Israeli soldiers on the borders, it means Hezbollah is going to say, what I'm doing is I am trying to get rid of the occupation of my country. And you cannot actually stop them from doing that. This is the raison d'etre of Hezbollah, is that they are saying what we are doing is we are defending our territory, we are defending our homes, we are defending our orchard, our land. Okay. So you cannot stop them.
All right. Many thanks indeed. Baria Alamuddin from Al Hayat newspaper. Many thanks.
Thank you.
You're watching BBC News 24. Let's check the headlines for you. At least 10 people have been killed.
Far on Monday, but until international troops are there to actually monitor it, what hope is there of it actually sticking?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, one has been praying, of course, for this moment to come, be it as late as it is. One is shocked also that the UN has taken so long. Now that it has come, it also only lies within Israel. We were all shocked yesterday that while peace was being made at the UN, where people were expecting this very precious moment of ceasefire, Israel was sending more troops, the bombardment was escalating, the airstrikes was escalating. So let us only hope and wait until Monday morning. Of course, in the meantime, more killing is happening on both sides. We have just heard that 7 Israeli soldiers, another maybe 50 or 100 Lebanese have been dying and today and have died and injured. So I would have hoped that the ceasefire would have been announced yesterday and that would have been implemented today. It's not happening because the international community, again, has given Israel another chance of escalating the war, of killing more people in Lebanon.
How do you assess the score in this conflict? Hezbollah, Israel, who has gained the most by it?
I see it as everybody has lost. I see that justice in the world has lost, that humanity has lost at large. I think the UN has lost at large. I think the policies of America and Britain has lost in the area. People mistrust the government here and also in the US more in the area. I only can see also the death and the destruction of Lebanon more than Israel. And of course there's been death and destruction in Israel as well.